Hello and welcome to No Drop. This episode is the final episode on my series about fatigue following the Rapha Festive 500. I am very happy to report that the fatigue is behind me. It is the middle of April, and I've probably been out of that fatigue zone for a little bit over a month now, but it took some pretty serious rebuilding to feel like I was finally where I was at before and also sort of starting to make actual progress again. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Let's back up and just sort of look at how this whole story unfolded. At the end of December, during the week between Christmas Eve and New Year's Day, I rode 1,000 kilometers. I think it was roughly 630-ish miles. And that was part of the Rapha Festive 500. It was something like 40 or 50 hours on the bike. It was one double century, 3 centuries, a couple 50-mile rides, and then I think one 30-mile ride. Huge week, monstrous week, by far the biggest week that I have ever put in only on the bike. Now, following that, I was planning on recovery probably taking 4 to 6 weeks to sort of feel like I could train and make progress again. But in that time, I didn't really expect to lose any fitness. I thought I would just sort of maintain, and when the time came, I would feel like I have energy again. I could get back after it and start making progress. The fatigue the first 2 weeks was pretty surprising. I think like 9 days after I finished all those rides, a friend of mine was having a birthday ride in Malibu, and that was like a 45 or 50-mile ride or something like that they were having their friends come out to. And that ride was so hard. And that's when I realized, okay, maybe I'm in a little bit deeper than I even imagined I would be. About a week after that, I get another surprise in the middle of January, and I get really sick. I was traveling for work, and I picked up a bug along the way. That sickness knocked me out for a good 2 weeks. And my guess is that a big part of that was the amount of fatigue I already had on my body, and then some sort of little virus getting in there, and it could probably just flourish because all my defenses were down. And I got very sick for a couple weeks. Finally started to feel like I wasn't, actively sick anymore. So now we're at the end of January, and I'm finally feeling like I'm not sick, but the fatigue from that illness carried with me for over a month. So all the way through February and then into March. By the time I get to March, I am starting to feel like I'm making gains again. When I work out, it actually is starting to feel good. One really strange thing throughout February after my illness, if there were times that I would exercise, I would feel ill again for 2 or 3 days after that. I've never had that happen before. That was a first. That was a really clear indicator to me that, hey, slow down. You're not ready for this yet. You know, to actually feel like you are physically ill after a day of training or a day of activity is a very negative indicator. So I was very gentle with myself all the way through February. And then getting into March, I'm finally starting to feel good again. I lost a lot of fitness in that 2.5 month time, just recovering, being fatigued from workouts, getting sick, being bedridden for a couple weeks, then needing to rest and get lots of sleep for the entire month of February. Once I was feeling good and I got back to my program, I realized that I needed to start from a much more basic place than I was anticipating. It's always humbling for me coming back from injuries with something like this, I would refer to this as an injury. We have the fatigue of an actual activity and then an illness. For all intents and purposes, this was an injury that I was working through. And it's always very humbling for me to come back from things like that because you really do need to adjust your foundation. And if you are used to doing 10 or 12-hour weeks of activity and you're coming off something like this, you might be doing 3 to 5 hours of activity. But that was the most beneficial thing that I could do for myself, was to take it easy, realize that I need to find a place where I can still make progress and be gentle with my body. So I really tapered everything back and pretty much spent the whole month of March just getting back to what I would say is my baseline or my normal foundational fitness. Now that we're into April, I am finally feeling like I have a bit more fitness to play with. You know, when I'm going out, I'm not exhausted on rides. I'm feeling excited. I am enjoying not only the riding, but the social aspect of it, being able to reconnect with people who I really haven't seen all year. So it's been such a treat to feel 100% again. But that path to get to that place, we're basically talking about 3 months of the year devoted to a huge cliff, a drop off in fitness, and then kind of fighting your way back up. And now here we are in April, and I'm finally feeling like I can sort of play with my fitness again. And I'm not taking it for granted in any way. I understand the amount of work that took to get back to this place, the amount of focus, the amount of discipline to step back from activity, which as athletes or active people can often be a very challenging thing to do. And I'm proud of the way that whole story went, but it's a humbling experience. It can be frustrating at times. It's so important to just give ourselves that space, especially with the double whammy of extreme fatigue from riding and then getting sick. When I do big rides like this, one thing that I always think of ahead of time is I do try to plan and anticipate what is my recovery going to be after something like this. And I usually put those in terms of, 2 to 4 weeks for really, really big events. I'm talking, 20-hour plus rides. I do think of those in terms of weeks of recovery. And so during that time, I will keep my effort levels sort of intentionally low, just because I know how traumatic and how damaging those really big ride experiences can be. This experience, though, taught me that if something goes wrong in that recovery process, how much does that time frame get stretched out? How much longer does your recovery actually take? It's a really valuable lesson, not one that I would like to go through again. To address this, I'll probably be thinking of ways in the future where if I'm going to do a big week of riding like that again, if I'm going to do 50 hours of training in a week, I'm not only going to have a recovery plan set up for after that, I'm also going to think about what if things go wrong. Think of it in terms of risk management. What should I be doing to mitigate my chances of getting sick, re-injuring myself, just thinking a little bit more outside the box and not just focusing on best case scenario, right? I just have to take it easy for 2 to 4 weeks and then I'll be fine. If things go perfectly, that can be a great plan. But if any variables pop up, if anything changes, now I've seen that recovery plan, the fatigue you experience from that event, that recovery could take twice as long as you're originally anticipating and put you in a place where you might have to fight to get back where you were. You're essentially retraining to get back where you were before. So, a valuable lesson, like I said, hopefully just a once in a lifetime thing. Going forward in the year, I am super stoked to just be riding. I do have a couple of big rides coming up this year, maybe a couple Everesting attempts, a couple of big routes through the mountains that me and my buddy SpongeBob have been talking about. So I'm excited about riding and getting back into it. I got a little bit of a late start, but that's okay. And on all of these big rides, you can bet that thinking about recovery, fatigue, and then some risk management practices, thinking up some scenarios of, well, what if recovery doesn't go as planned? So hopefully figuring out some better systems, some better habits to make it a smoother recovery experience for the rest of the year. All right, until next time, ride safe.